This is part 2 of our journey through Colossians, which is an incredible book. It's a short book, 4 chapters, so it should only take us about 40 months, but we'll see. And it'll be a lot of fun walking through this. We're going to hit verses 3 through 12 in chapter 1 today. We kind of just had our introduction last week, and we just talked about a lot of the overarching themes and what this whole book is about, kind of the heart behind this letter from the Apostle Paul to this community. It's a community of Colossae, and it's in south central modern day Turkey, and this is a hub. This is a lot of different. It's a cultural center, so a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different people with different perspectives, all colliding in one place. And so Paul's writing this letter because he's gotten wind that this community that we never have record of him being in or visiting in person, but he oversees it. And a companion of his named Epaphras was he's a local boy who founded this church. And so he mentioned him quite a bit. But he's getting wind that there's a lot of pull and people being pulled in different directions because of all the conflicting views and perspectives, and everyone's vying for their opinion to have supremacy in this region. And so a lot of different takes in terms of just mental assent and spiritual ideas and everything. There's mystics are definitely a big part of this region, where they believe that basically nothing is supernatural. And then you've got people who are just really big on rituals and worshiping various gods. You've got people who are just intellectuals, and they just said, you just need to know more than everybody else. So all these things are kind of vying for supremacy. And this whole letter is about Jesus is it. Jesus plus nothing equals everything. Everything minus Jesus equals nothing. And so we need to stay on course. And so that's the theme of the letter. So Colossians chapter 1, verses 3 through 12, this is what he says. We give thanks to God, the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, praying always for you, since we heard of your faith in Jesus, and the love which you have for all the saints, because of the hope laid up for you in heaven, of which you previously heard in the word of truth, the gospel, which has come to you just as in all the world, and it is also constantly bearing fruit, and it is increasing, even as it has been doing in you since the day you heard of it and understood the grace of God in truth. Just as you learned it from Epaphras, our beloved fellow bondservant, who is a faithful servant of Christ on our behalf, and he has also informed us of your love in the Spirit. For this reason also, since the day we heard of it, we have not ceased to pray for you, to ask that you may be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding, so that you walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, please him in all respects, bearing fruit in every good work, increasing in the knowledge of God, strengthened with all power according to his glorious might, for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience, joyously giving thanks to the Father, who has qualified us to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. There's a lot here, and so I'm excited to kind of walk through this together. And the two things opening, Paul says I'm very thankful for is first their faith in Jesus, and so he highlights that. He said I'm thankful for your faith in Jesus, and then he says I'm also thankful for your love for each other. So your faith in Jesus and your love for each other. If you go to Galatians 5:6. The Apostle Paul makes a statement. The only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. And so that's the mark of a believer. This is him saying you guys are believers. You trust Jesus, and because you trust Jesus, you love each other. And so I've said this many, many times. If your doctrine or theology doesn't lead you to love people more, then your theology is wrong. Faith will cause you to love others. So trust in Jesus, love for others. And so what he's saying is, opening this conversation, there is a presupposition that his audience, the people he's talking to, are believers. And so this is not a conversation for just anyone and everyone. This is not just a generic statement that he's making. He's talking to Christians. He's talking to followers of Christ, believers. He's saying you have faith in Jesus, you have love for each other. That means that faith is alive in you. It's active, it's meaningful. And so he's thankful that their introduction into this faith, which is causing love for each other, is a hope. He says what would cause you to kind of be introduced into this faith is a hope. And the Bible says faith is the substance of things hoped for. And so that hope in Christ and hope in eternity with the Father, hope in what God has done for them, has ignited them to have ignited a faith within them. And so he says this, ever since you heard the word of truth, the gospel, that hope has been ignited, has started happening within your hearts. And so the first domino of their experience and what's happening, the proof is in the pudding. They're believing God, they're loving each other, they're living with this overwhelming hope. The thing that ignited that started that was first and foremost, they heard the gospel and the lights came on. So the gospel was introduced to them. They heard it, they believed it, and now they're living with faith, hope, and love. That's how it works. The gospel is constantly bearing fruit and increasing. We just spent 8 weeks this summer talking about what living a fruitful life looks like and the definitions of living a fruitful life. And so, but at the core, the gospel is what ignites our faith, and then it's what continually fuels our faith. And the gospel itself is constantly bearing fruit and increasing within us. Now, I think that most Christians would believe and accept the idea that the gospel is introductory to Christianity, that you've got to hear the gospel, that's what gets you in. But then after a while, and we start throwing around words like discipleship and different other words that kind of a similar meaning, where you graduate from the gospel and then you move into deeper territory. And so a lot of people would believe the gospel is introductory, it's what ignites your faith. But then you fuel the faith, and you feed the fire of your faith with deeper subject matter, which happens to be typically behavior modification, do this better, try harder, all that kind of stuff. And so we shift the focus from Jesus and what he's done for us to me and what I got to do for God. Somehow shifting the focus to me, who is about as deep as a kiddie pool, is far deeper territory than keeping the focus on Jesus. This is where we segue from faith and a pursuit of Christ into religion. If the focus is you, and if the hope within that focus is you, and the path to betterment is you, then we've unfortunately ventured into the territory of religion, and it is empty, and it is meaningless, and it doesn't take us anywhere. So the Apostle Paul is doubling down here. He's saying, no. The gospel not only is the spark that ignites your faith, it's the fuel that keeps it going indefinitely. You need a steady, regular diet of the gospel. You require it, you need it, your soul needs it, your mind needs it, your life needs it, you need it, your community needs it. We gotta have the gospel. So, he's talking about this beautiful result of the gospel constantly bearing fruit and increasing in our hearts and our lives. And he goes into a lot of detail, what that looks like when the gospel is constantly bearing fruit and increasing in our lives. And he uses the opportunity as a prayer blessing over them to start stating the things that he wishes to see as a result of the gospel constantly bearing fruit and increasing in our lives. And so he says this, we have not ceased to pray for you and ask that you may be, and then we're going to walk through the next few things, and we're going to take one item at a time. I'm going to paraphrase them a little bit just to kind of give them some easily understood context. And so, but the first thing he says, my prayer is that you would be filled with knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. That sounds fantastic. To be filled with the knowledge of his will and all spiritual wisdom and understanding. And so, in other words, my prayer is that you would gain God's perspective. Gain God's perspective. That you would have a vantage point and an understanding of what God's thinking. His will, his perspective on things. His ways are higher, his thoughts are higher. We get lost in the weeds sometimes. We get overwhelmed by circumstances and the priorities that are presented to us in this world, in this culture. If you turn on the news for any length of time, no matter what news channel you turn on, it is, it's like the soundtrack could easily be, it's the end of the world as you know it. It's just the sky is perpetually falling. Half of the country are the devil, and you need to just be mad and scared all the time. And so it's easy to get lost in that. It's easy to get caught up in that. You're kind of getting pulled into the current of our culture, and this is a prayer that you gain a bigger, brighter, better perspective. Gain God's perspective. Romans 12:2 says this: don't be conformed to this world. The Message translation says don't fit into it without even thinking about it. Don't be conformed to this world, but instead be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by the testing, testing you may discern what the will of God is, which is exactly his prayer, what is good and acceptable and perfect. That's the heart of Paul for this community. That's the heart of God for all of us. And it is it's a result of the gospel bearing fruit in our lives, is that we start getting a bigger, better perspective. We start seeing things from God's vantage point. We have an understanding of his will, his knowledge. The second thing he prays for is that we would, as a result of all that we would walk in a manner worthy of the Lord, and that we would please him in all respects. Now, this could be daunting. This could be an overwhelming challenge. You could read this and say, okay, I'm going to please God in all respects. That could make you become self-conscious. But that's not the point of this statement. In fact, what he's talking about is a life according to the priorities of God, to live according to God's priorities. And so this is not a challenge to get out there and do better and try harder. This is a result of gaining God's perspective. And we can only gain God's perspective if God gives us his perspective. But if he gives us his perspective, he starts working out, living out our lives in a manner worthy of him, according to his will, according to his heart and desire, to please him in all respects. You have to gain that ability and that focus and that emphasis and that path through a connection with Jesus. The next thing is that in doing this, we would be bearing fruit in every good work. And so another way to say that is to display God's qualities. So we're gaining God's perspective, we're living according to God's priorities, and we're displaying God's qualities. Bearing fruit is the supernatural working its way through the natural, God's qualities, who he is and what he's about, showing up in the lives of everyday, ordinary humans. Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10 says this: we are his workmanship. We're created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God has prepared beforehand so that we would walk in them. God has set up opportunities. He set up moments. He set up these amazing chances for us to show up, to be present and to let God show up through us in that moment, so that we can allow the qualities of God to be manifested through us in a moment that needs it. He set all that up. If you're going to catch a theme here, God's doing everything. Everything's from and through and to Him. It's not us taking the challenge, tagging in, say, God, I got it. I'll see you in a little bit. I'm gonna go kick some booty and take some names for the glory of God, and I'm gonna get out there. And this is not it. This is God doing what God can only do through us. The next thing that Paul prays for is this, that we would increase in the knowledge of God. I'm going to refer you back to Romans 12:2. This is kind of a different way to say it. To have our minds transformed. To have our minds transformed. To think with the mind of Christ. So increasing in the knowledge of God is getting outside of the knowledge of this world. Here's an interesting thing, and I thought about this a few years ago, and it was only in retrospect that I realized it. I've always had the consideration that more information equals more peace. If I just knew all the facts, if I knew the answers, if I just knew more, then I could actually have peace. Well, if that was true, then this current generation should be the most peaceful generation in all of history, because we have more information than any generation before. At the drop of a hat, you have every bit of human information that you could possibly have in your pocket. You don't have to have a library card. You don't have to earn it. You don't have to try hard. You just clumsily, and it'll even change. If you type it wrong, it'll fix it for you. You don't even have to spell. And so you just Google beep, bop, boop. Did you mean this? Oh, yes, I did. Thanks for being my brain. Enter. Now I know. Now that we have all this information, that we have all this knowledge, you would think, okay, now we've achieved that place that we all kind of hope for and dream for. We should have an abundance of peace. We should have peace to spare. Do we have peace? Less than ever. Well, what is that? Well, it's because we are trying to find peace, we're trying to find purpose, we're trying to find meaning, thinking as the world thinks, as if that information is here. But it is not. Because the peace of God bypasses understanding. It bypasses that kind of knowledge. It is having the mind of Christ. It is having the knowledge of God. It's having a big picture. Having the knowledge of God does this. You could look at one situation and say, this is it. This is going to be the worst thing ever. And I'm looking at this. I feel hopeless. I feel sad. I feel depressed. I feel dejected. And then you gain the mind of Christ, and here's God saying, I'm not going to let this take you out. I got you. I've already worked it out. I have, past tense, already worked this out for your good. It is already good for you, and you're going to be great on the other side of this. You're going to be thankful it even happened. I'm not going to leave you or forsake you. That is the same situation, same circumstance, same moment, facing the same thing, completely different perspective. One's having the mind of this world, and one's having the mind of Christ. 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3 through 4, it says this: His divine power has granted to us everything pertaining to life and godliness through the true knowledge of Him who called us by His own glory and excellence. For by these He has granted to us His precious and magnificent promises, so that by them you may become partakers of the divine nature. He's granted everything that you need. You have access to His perspective. His ways are higher, His thoughts are higher, and He gives you that perspective freely. He's granted everything you need. Going back to living life in a manner pleasing to God. He has given us everything that we need to walk this out. The next thing that Paul prays for is that we would be strengthened with all power according to His glorious might for the attaining of all steadfastness and patience. In other words, that we can experience supernatural endurance. Man, when you read that his prayer is that we be strengthened with all power. If you stop there, you're like, oh yeah, now we're talking. I want to be strengthened with all power. And then he says, for patience and steadfastness. I'm like, oh, what a letdown. When we think of being strengthened with all power, we think of something much more impressive than patience. But that is only because we disregard and reduce the power and the significance and the desperation for patience that we all have. The first description of love in the chapter of love, 1 Corinthians 13, love is patient. Patience is a virtue, and we say that. That's a colloquialism. That's a saying because no one has any. Part of traveling is keeping good time, and so we're traveling. We're like, we got to stop and get fast food. That's just part of the deal. So you stop, and it's called fast food, and you realize it is fast, technically speaking. It's not like the old days where we got to go pick the crops and do all the things that we got to do. But man, no one's patient. Everybody's getting really hot, and it's like, this is taking 4 minutes. And got all day. It's like, dude, you're getting food in 4 minutes. That is pretty remarkable. But we're like, come on. And everybody's getting mad and honking at each other and everything. Just driving in general. There's no patience anywhere. And we're getting less and less and less. And we think, okay, oh, thank God for all the technology, all the advancements in technology. It's making our lives easier. No, it's making us spoiled, rotten kids. If we get on someone's Wi-Fi and it spins for like 10 seconds, we're like, oh my goodness gracious. What are we, the Flintstones? Come on. Patience is a beautiful, beautiful thing. You treat people way differently. We were driving back, and of course the sun had touched down in Florida. They call it the Sunshine State because that's where the sun lives during the summer. It lives there. It's got an apartment. And so it was hot, and Disney World is just a lot of humans who all need showers. And so anyway, it's a lot of just people pressed up on each other, and so we decided going into it, and we used to be pros. I would throw Berkeley on my shoulders. It's hard to do that now. She's 17. So I used to throw her on my shoulders, and we just like, honey, stay with me. I look at Sonia like, stay with me. And we treat it like we're SEAL Team 6. I mean, we're busting through, like, got to get there in 30 seconds. And we kind of knew all the strategies to make sure we wrote everything in sequential order. And this time we went to it and we said, I don't care if we don't ride nothing. Let's take our time and let's just be slow old people. It was glorious. So we're driving back, and Sonia's like, I think that was my favorite time at the parks we've ever had. Because we were slow, and it was meaningful, and I held the door open for people, and I stopped and said hello to people, and I try to talk to people, and every time I turn around, Sonia's making new friends with other families on the monorail. It's like we're just having a great time. When you go to Walmart and you are like in a hurry, you don't notice another human being. When you can take your time and stop. Well, now they get the automated cashiers. But you stop and talk to a few people and just say, how you doing today? And man, anytime you're nice to people nowadays, they think you're trying to take their wallet. It's like it's a weird thing. But the expectations are low. But I'm telling you, it makes a huge difference. When you're patient, it makes you nicer. You treat people better. And not only that, when you're patient, the world treats you better. Life treats you better. The stress levels start to go down. To have steadfastness, to say, listen, this is a powerful statement, and I know we can't all necessarily say this right now, but may the grace of God cause us to be able to say this eventually. If nothing else changes in my life, I'm good. And if everything changes in my life, I'm good. God's good. He's got me. I'm good. It's a powerful place to be in. To say that my life is not built on circumstances, is not built on things going my way always. Listen, it's all good. God's big, God's in control, and God's going to work it all out, and I trust Him. That is a powerful place to be in. To be strengthened with all power so that we can experience steadfastness and patience, to endure, to have a supernatural endurance, to stay the course, and to not suffer from just kind of grass is greener somewhere else, to stay rooted and grounded in His love. If you skip forward, and we'll get to this in the next week or two, Colossians chapter 1, verse 22 and 23, or 21 through 23, he goes ahead and mentions this again. He says that although you were formerly alienated and hostile in mind, engaged in evil deeds, He has now reconciled you in His fleshly body through His death in order to present you before Him a holy and blameless sacrifice beyond reproach. And if indeed you continue in the faith, firmly established and steadfast, not moved away from the hope of the gospel you have heard. This is you got to stay the course. You can't check out before the third leg of the race. This is about finishing the race, staying engaged, and God gives us a supernatural endurance to do that. The next thing He prays for is joyously giving thanks to the Father who has qualified you to share in the inheritance of the saints in light. This is how he wraps up the prayer. And the thing that I wanted to highlight is this idea of to continually be thankful, to live thankful. In chapter 3 of this book, Colossians 3:15, he says, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, which you indeed were called in one body, and be thankful." Live thankful. There's a wonderful author and speaker named Brene Brown, and every lady in this room is like, "I love Chris so much, he mentioned Brene Brown." She's wonderful. I've read a few of her books, and she has made it a career to talk about, in a lot of different respects, but talk about shame and guilt, but also talk about living with suffering. And she speaks of joy as one of the most difficult and terrifying human emotions to embrace. She said it is probably the hardest human emotion to fully embrace, to fully lean into, and to fully trust, because we are perpetually, as she puts it, dress rehearsing tragedy all the time in our minds. So to fully embrace joy would be to let our guards down and then be disappointed by circumstances. And what she found, and she is a believer, and so I'm sure a lot of that fuels her research, but this is her perspective on it. In her research, she found that the people who were able to actually lean into joy, on the rare occasions, people that were most susceptible to life feeling joyful, the common denominator that she began to find in all of them was gratitude. That gratitude was a precursor to living joyous lives. So practicing intentional gratitude every day causes joy to be more easily experienced. Now, doing that, to live grateful, to practice gratitude every day, means that we actually have to look for things to be grateful for. We have to pay attention. We have to open our eyes. We have to be purposeful about noticing and even taking some personal inventory of what's happening. Now, there could be a million things going right, and that one thing going wrong has got all of our undivided attention, and it's all we see. So someone says, how you doing? I'm like, oh man, I'm awful. Why? Well, my lawnmower broke. Okay, you have a healthy family, you have an amazing job, God's taking care of all your needs, you lack and want for nothing, you're not hungry, you're not without the basic necessities of life, but the lawnmower is not working. So the Apostle Paul is writing to a group of young believers that he is obviously very thankful for. He mentions that time and time again. Very thankful for you. And he's thankful for the fact that they got the main thing right. That's how he opens the prayer. I'm so thankful that you trust Jesus and you love each other. I'm very, very thankful that you trust Jesus and you love each other. Everything else is going to it's like lining up dominoes. Everything else is going to fall into place because you love Jesus, or you trust Jesus and you love each other. So his motivation with this letter is not to present them with a list of things that they need. They need to acquire, they need to gain. It's actually the reverse. This letter is to encourage them to notice and be aware of what they already have. To take inventory and to be grateful for what they have. And what they have in Christ is everything. They have everything. We'll read this in a couple weeks, but he goes on to say in the same book, in him, in Christ, you've been made complete. You're full. You got it all because you got Jesus. His warning is that they not fall prey to those who insist that they need to acquire what they're missing. That the presupposition is you're missing something. All the world, all of culture, and I don't know all of it's malicious, but it's there, it's constant, is to advertise and to put in your face what you're missing. You know what you need. You know what you've got to have. You know what you should do. Well, the first revelation here is that you're not missing anything. If you're single today, you are going to be just as loved, just as valued, just as purposeful when you're no longer single. There's nothing that's going to change in terms of God's perspective of you. If you're going to have children, if that's part of the plans, you're the same loved, valued, important, significant person with or without kids. Circumstances, parts of life, phases of life will change, will come and go, and they're all beautiful. And why not be thankful for all of them? But through all of them, you are just as complete. Not because you've made yourself, because God's made you. In him, you have been made complete. We're not on like some wild goose chase trying to find something to make us complete or valued or important. You are. You're there. Paul's presenting to them the too good to be true news that these things have been made available to us in the person of Jesus. This is not some shopping list to go find. You need to go find gratitude. You need to go find supernatural endurance. You need to go find God's perspective. You need to go find the qualities of God. You have them. His prayer is that they just show up, that they are being manifested, that they show up. We're already on the path directly to these things. We don't need to take a detour. We have Jesus, therefore we have all these things. So to gain God's perspective, to live according to God's priorities, to display God's qualities, to have our minds transformed, to experience supernatural endurance, to be continually thankful. This is who Jesus is. Therefore, as he is, so are you. We're talking about qualities and personality traits of Jesus who is in us. We don't need to conform to this world. We're being transformed as Jesus is renewing our minds. These are qualities, beautiful qualities, not that we do for God. This is God's work in us. And so we are developing these traits, these qualities, these perspectives, these priorities, because the gospel itself is constantly bearing fruit, increasing within us. I think one of the hardest things to unlearn in this life, in this world, is that we got to go to 50 million places to find the 50 million things that are going to make us feel complete. That is hardwired in us. We think that, and that's a moving target as we go throughout our lives. And so there's things that you need right now that 10 years ago weren't even on the list. And there's things that when you were younger, that was like the end-all be-all, man. If I had a Barry Bonds rookie card when I was 12 years old, man, I would have been over the moon. My life would have been complete. Me and Jamaica were just talking about our first pairs of Jordans when we were kids. It's like, man, I thought if I got my first pair of Jordans, man, God was going to come back and it was going to be heaven from there on. And I went to my mom and said, can I get a pair of Jordans? She said, how much? And I told her, and she said, no. So we had a contest. I was in 8th grade, and this person who owned a local Chick-fil-A franchise would come to our social studies class once a week. And I always loved him coming because he'd bring like Little Debbie's and he'd talk about stuff that wasn't social studies. And so he put out to our class, or every class, he said, whoever raises their grade point average up the most, I'm going to give you $150 cash. Well, a lot of kids they were averaging A's and B's, and so they didn't have a lot of wiggle room. I was not. I had all kinds of wiggle room. And so he incentivized me with cash money, and so guess who won? So I came home, and I was like fanning myself with all these $5 bills, and my mom's like, what are you doing? You have like a gambling ring at school? I was like, no. She's like, you got straight A's? You can do that? You're able? I was like, you don't offer me money. I said, take me to the mall, and I bought my first pair of Jordans. I would have thought that's where, okay, this is the crescendo. It didn't last, because then it's the next pair. We always need more. It's never enough. This is why the Bible talks about this idea. Jesus talks about this amazing moment where he talks to a Samaritan woman. Samaritan woman, stay away from me. He talks to this woman at a well. He's a Samaritan woman. This is kind of a social no-no. And so he has this conversation with her, and he says, you keep coming back to this well. It's never enough. You got to keep coming back. And he says, I'm going to place a well within you that'll never run dry. He calls it a wellspring of life. That's what we're after. And that's what this whole letter is about. He said, you got it. You got it. You're there. You have it. Now we just need to live like we have it. May we be constantly aware of the abundance of who God is working in and through our hearts. That's the beauty of the gospel. It will never run dry. It will never fail you. It's always more than enough. I want to pray. If you would, just bow your heads and close your eyes. I'm going to take a moment and pray as we wrap up.